On this Tuesday night, it's not enough to know your relationship status. Facebook wants to change it too. Facing backlash over the privacy scandal, Mark Zuckerberg unveiled plans for users to share even more details of their private lives. So why is Facebook choosing this moment to get into the dating game?
Also tonight, coping with an unthinkable tragedy. 3 Manitoba boys killed by an alleged drunk driver. Why the family of one says he forgives the man behind the wheel.
And later, Jets fever takes over Winnipeg. Game on. This is The National.
To say it's been a rough few weeks for Facebook would be an understatement. The Cambridge Analytica scandal, a grilling in Congress over privacy protection, apology after apology from CEO Mark Zuckerberg. But at today's annual Facebook Developers Conference, he was on the offensive with a surprising new goal for the online giant, helping your love life. Jacqueline Hansen explains.
Today, we are announcing a new set of features coming soon around dating.
Despite the cloud of controversy still hanging over his company, Mark Zuckerberg wants to play matchmaker.
This is going to be for building real long-term relationships, all right, not just hookups. It's going to be in the Facebook app, but it's totally optional. It's opt-in.
A Facebook dating profile would differ from the standard profile in one big way. Current friends won't see it. Users will only be matched up with non-friends. And seeing as Facebook is sitting on a mountain of user data, it likely has much of the information it needs to do that. Users' names, ages, locations, photos, interests, and relationship status. 200 million users list themselves as single.
How did it take them so long to do this?
If Facebook makes the service free, it could seriously disrupt the online dating industry.
It could be a huge competitor for these other platforms because they have this massive user base already and people like using it. Plus, they may not charge people to use it. And of course, how can anyone compete with all of that?
That question made a big dent in the share price of Match Group, the company that owns Match.com, OkCupid, Tinder, and Plenty of Fish. Its biggest shareholder came out swinging at Facebook, saying, "Come on in, the water's warm." Their product could be great for U.S.-Russia relationships. Zuckerberg tried to get ahead of any privacy concerns.
So I want to be clear that we have designed this with privacy and safety in mind from the beginning.
But some young people are questioning whether they want to share any more of their life with Facebook.
Not something I would be interested in using, I guess.
No, don't trust Facebook at all.
I already deactivated my Facebook, so sorry, Mark, but...
and I don't really use it, so sorry, Mark.
While trust is the foundation of a successful relationship, it will be necessary for Facebook's dating plans as well. Jacqueline Hansen, CBC News, Toronto.
And Zuckerberg talked about more than just his online dating ambitions today. In the wake of the privacy scandal, he announced a new feature that he says will offer users a measure of some control over targeted ads.
We're starting with something that a lot of people have asked about recently, and that's the information that we get from websites and apps who are using Facebook's advertising and analytics tools. So you're going to be able to use this tool to see the information about the apps and websites you've interacted with. You'll be able to clear all this information from your account, and you'll even be able to turn it off, having this information stored with your account going forward.
It'll look something like this. So you'll go into your settings and basically click your way through, but keep in mind, once again, the onus will be on you to protect your data browsing history. So by either deleting your history regularly or remembering to opt out altogether. If you do nothing, expect Facebook to keep collecting your data as usual. Matthew Braga is the CBC's senior technology reporter. Okay, Matthew, why is Facebook doing this now? What are they trying to suggest by this clearing history idea?
So it's this idea that you have all these partners that work with Facebook. They do things like advertising, analytics, and they share information about what websites you browse on the internet. So when you go to Nike.com, Nike.com might say, hey, this user visited Nike.com. Facebook can use that to make the ads you receive, the content in your feed more relevant. Maybe you visit a lot of sports sites, you get more sports content in your feed. that sort of thing. Now, Facebook is saying it's going to give users more control over who shares that data with Facebook and how that data is used, allowing you to sort of remove certain websites or just opt out of that feature entirely. How that actually works in practice, how that changes advertising and things like that in your feed, we don't totally know yet. It's still set to be figured out. But certainly all of this in reaction to some of the questions that Mark Zuckerberg got from Congress about sort of Facebook's data collections, how it uses data and the controls that users have over data, and some of the changes that have been happening in Europe around privacy regulations there.
And changes, I guess, that may eventually come to this side of the ocean as well. Okay, what is Facebook's end game with everything we heard today?
So all of these announcements, right, they all kind of come back to data, right? The data that Facebook shares, the data that Facebook collects, how it uses this data. If you look at a lot of sort of the larger context in these trends, right, it's basically Facebook saying, we're going to share less data with developers, we're going to make less data accessible to outside parties, and in return, it's sort of, the flip side of that, right, is Facebook is rolling out all of these features that rely more on the data that Facebook itself has. So, of course, the dating app is one example of that. That relies heavily on a massive amount of data that Facebook has amassed. Things like there's this crisis check feature where Facebook is going to be featuring more information that its users post to the platform about sort of natural disasters and things like that, as opposed to saying, hey, go to news websites instead. It's all of these sort of moves to leverage the data that people are giving to Facebook on Facebook, as opposed to making it available to outside parties as much as they did in the past.
Okay, interesting strategic move. We'll see what happens. Matthew, thank you. Here's a look at what else is coming up on The National. 5 politicians have filed complaints, 2 ministers out, and countless questions over allegations of harassment and bullying at the legislature in St. John's. What the heck is happening in Newfoundland and Labrador?
Plus, a confidential memo obtained by CBC News reveals just how far that Ottawa went to help extradite Hassan Diab, a Canadian citizen imprisoned in France for 3 years.
And a tight-knit Manitoba First Nation is grappling with the loss of 3 young boys who were hit and killed by a vehicle on Saturday night. But the community is also keeping someone else in their thoughts, the driver accused of hitting them, and their message for him, perhaps not what you might expect. Today, the family of one of the victims spoke to the CBC's Cameron McIntosh.
They were just boys out being boys. Saturday morning, a group of friends shot this video while playing on the ice near Nelson House. That evening, 3 of them were struck and killed while walking down this road by an alleged impaired driver. 11-year-old Keithan Lobster, 13-year-old Terrence Spence, and 11-year-old Mateo Moore Spence.
So when I went to identify his body, it's like my heart was going to stop.
Malcolm Moore is Mateo's stepfather. Anthony Spence is the boy's biological dad.
He had a good sense of humor. He's a loving kid.
27-year-old Todd Linklater faces several charges, including impaired driving causing death. Court records show he has a prior impaired conviction.
I was feeling frustrated at first. I felt hate.
Feelings both men say they're now putting aside to keep the tragedy from ruining more lives.
I want to talk to him, or just to let him know if he can't be here, that deep down inside in my heart I forgive him. And
I want him to know we forgive him. We care about him.
In Cree tradition, forgiveness is part of healing. The families of all 3 boys have reached out to the family of the accused.
They've lost their son too. He's going to jail.
As families grieve, others are looking at the factors in the accident, predominantly alcohol. For the time being at this checkpoint, none is being allowed into the community. Chief Marcel Moody says the tragedy was a wake-up call in a community that struggles with alcohol.
Even we as leaders have to take a second look in terms of safety for our community and particularly for our children.
Last night, hundreds turned out for a vigil near the spot where the boys were killed. A sacred fire will burn in their memory for 4 days. As for the accused, Spence and Moore say he would be welcome at the funerals.
That's how I was taught, to forgive.
It's the beginning of what they call a painful but necessary journey. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Nelson House.
Funeral arrangements are still being finalized for the 3 boys. There will be private wakes for them in the coming days, and we're expecting a larger community service early next week.
5 members of the government of Newfoundland and Labrador have come forward with complaints about a toxic work environment As Chris O'Neill Yates tells us, what started as allegations of bullying have now led to calls for the Premier to resign.
The Honourable the Premier.
Question period in the Newfoundland and Labrador legislature began as it has for the better part of the week, with the opposition PCs hammering Premier Dwight Ball over mounting allegations of bullying and harassment in his own government.
How could you have watched this happen and unfold over the last 2.5 years and not taken any action before now?
In any case where people would have felt that they felt they were intimidated or they felt bullied, my door was always open.
Former Finance Minister Cathy Bennett is one of 5 people to come forward with complaints of a toxic work environment in the legislature.
I experienced things like intimidation, isolation, the fear of being on the wrong side.
Bennett won't say who antagonized her, but complaints against Eddie Joyce and Dale Kirby have prompted the Premier to turf them from cabinet and caucus while the allegations are investigated. Ball claims he didn't know about any bad behavior until last week.
It's hard to accept that he was unaware, but if he was unaware, is he doing the job that he's expected to be doing?
This Liberal backbencher is the only man among the complainants.
I've heard people on social media say, you need to suck it up.
The leader of the NDP says Ball has only one choice.
I believe he needs to resign. It's clear that he and his government are no longer able to govern in this very critical time.
Leaders don't resign in challenging times.
The Premier says his government needs to do better.
If we are going to make the changes that are required to make the workplace safer for MHAs like Ms. Bennett and for MHAs like the others that have come forward, and all of us.
Now that the long silence in the legislature has been broken, the government can only wait and see if more allegations are to come. Chris O'Neill Yates, CBC News, St. John's.
Well, for the bigger picture, let's go to Anthony Germain, host of CBC's Here and Now in St. John's. And Anthony, tell us the significance of all of this.
Well, Ian, the phrase here is the arse is out of her, and that's certainly the case with what's happening in Newfoundland politics right now. I mean, think of the optics. A female cabinet minister saying she was forced out by an old boys club that were bullying her. You've got an education minister. He's gone because he's facing bullying charges. A friend of the Premier, another cabinet minister. So every day brings new surprises, right? 2 ministers in a week. So there is a sort of chaotic element, but there's a more serious issue going on here, Ian. People are talking about our whole system of politics. Why do we call it a whip? Why is it vote like this or else? What's with the cut and thrust of politics? So people sort of looking at this saying, yeah, there's a lot of noise, but there's something more serious being talked about here.
Now, bullying, the awareness of bullying is an issue that's being discussed right across the country, but to what extent is what we're seeing here kind of specific to Newfoundland and Labrador?
Well, I think there's always, in confrontational politics, it sort of applies right across the country. But you think of some of the politicians this place has produced. John Crosby, Brian Tobin, Danny Williams. I think those guys and their way of doing politics, they would certainly have aspects of being a bit of a bully. So this is a big thing for Newfoundland politics to actually be thinking about. So it's caused quite an interesting conversation about just what should politics be in 2018.
Thanks, Anthony.
And on Parliament Hill, an investigation into the behaviour of NDP MP Aaron Weir is over. And CBC News has learned it found multiple harassment complaints against him. Now, the rookie Saskatchewan MP is speaking out about the allegations. Catherine Cullen is breaking this story for us tonight.
If you go through a process of soliciting complaints from hundreds of staff people, you will get some complaints.
In fact, CBC News has learned multiple women have complained about Aaron Weir. But the story of how he got here is unusual. It started when a fellow MP sent out an email making allegations that Weir had harassed women, but not her.
Those concerns were raised were not by someone that was a survivor.
So the NDP called in a third-party investigator, so independent that even Jagmeet Singh and his staff don't know who is making the allegations. But CBC News has spoken to one complainant. She says Weir was angry and belligerent when he spoke to her and that she felt physically intimidated. Weir thinks he knows who she is and says this is all about a debate over policy.
I did have a somewhat tense discussion with her, but I certainly did not display any anger or belligerence.
Singh wouldn't comment on the report today, but his chief of staff put out a statement saying the report contains private and confidential information which cannot be disclosed. The findings of the investigation that do not breach confidentiality will be released as soon as possible, but no word on when.
I fear that people with political access to grind have taken advantage of that process.
As for other harassment allegations that Weir is facing, he won't comment on those yet. Catherine Cullen, CBC News, Ottawa.
And still ahead on The National, guitar maker Gibson declares bankruptcy. We look at the legacy of a brand that launched hundreds of classic rock hits.
Plus, we now know what Robert Mueller wants to ask Donald Trump. What we don't know, who leaked the list of questions. Paul Hunter on why some are pointing the finger at Trump's own legal team.
And 1 week after that murderous van attack, a BC man's emotional journey to his grandmother's funeral in Toronto.
It was overwhelming. Just seeing that there's that many people that care and stuff for people that they don't even know, like, it really shows what us Canadians what we're made of and how we can come together.
Tonight on The National, rising floodwaters in New Brunswick have officials warning some people to get out while it's still safe. Just a few hours ago, a voluntary evacuation notice was issued for some residents living along the southern part of the St. John River. And in flood zones south of Fredericton, people are also being told to consider leaving home before it gets too dangerous. The fear is that over the next 48 hours, water levels could keep rising. In Montreal tonight, clashes between protesters and police at a demonstration to mark International Workers' Day. According to a CBC reporter at the scene, protesters set off firecrackers and officers used tear gas to disperse them. Montreal police say they arrested 5 people. And Quebec Superior Court has struck down part of a controversial membership law on a Mohawk reserve. For decades, the so-called marry out, get out rule has meant if you live on the Ganawage Reserve but marry a non-Indigenous person, you can't live on reserve. You have to leave. But today, a judge called that a violation of Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Ganawage's Mohawk Council says it is reviewing the decision.
After that van attack killed 10 people in Toronto, funerals were held today for 2 of the victims. Geraldine Brady was 83, a grandmother and a great-grandmother, known for her skill as a seamstress. She sold Avon products for 45 years. Dorothy Sewell was 80, a big fan of the Leafs and the Blue Jays. Her grandson, Elwood Delaney, flew in from Kamloops, British Columbia for her funeral. He spoke to us today as he visited the memorial.
Personally, it's affected me pretty hard. She was always there to talk to. And being across the country and not being able to be here right away was hard. I know she was such a good person, so wherever she is now, she's probably watching her sports still and being a good person. So I'm at peace with that side of it, but not how it happened. I'll probably never be really at peace with that part of it.
He is not alone. People in that North Toronto community still struggling to move on. Today, Joanna Emiliotis found quiet agony, but also close bonds.
The news crews are gone. It's quiet here now. And in a way, that makes it sadder.
It's just hard to fathom, the tragedy of it all, unless you really... It's just terrible.
The shock, the numbness of last week's attack is inevitably, slowly receding. What's left? A grief that seems more solitary.
Well, I thought about that as I was running up the street, and I thought, oh, we can never forget them.
The imprint of the attack is not always visible. Those white marks are paint over the van's deadly skid marks. A tragedy that still echoes. A stranger held Eddie Kang's hand, went through the contacts on his cell phone to find someone to tell. She reached Kevin, Panlilio. He came today to thank that woman, Shanahan.
I said, it's good to know that he wasn't alone, and that was really important. No, thanks. It was important to know that he wasn't alone.
Panlilio called Kang's wife in South Korea.
It was devastating for her, but the first thing she wanted to know was if someone was there, and then I said yes. And she cried even more, but not of sadness, and it was good to know.
Kang's widow now wants to meet Han too.
Must be a bit overwhelming, huh?
It is, but I just have to be strong for them because I know how much of a loss it was for them.
So I came running outside.
Bearing witness is its own burden. Ashish Varma saw 2 people die. He couldn't work all last week. The nightmares wouldn't stop.
For a few days it was so I couldn't even sleep properly because that thing had actually got stuck into my head. And then I'm slowly getting over it.
Everywhere, acts of kindness to help.
Hello. Hi. Hi.
A pastor from a local church drops by every shop to check in on people. And a few blocks away, where the attack ended, an offer to listen to.
You actually don't get over things like this. You try to live a new normal. In a situation like this where people are traumatized this way, sometimes you just need to be there.
And so he waits. Joanna Rumeliotis, CBC News, Toronto.
Next on The National, Hassan Diab spent more than 3 years in a French prison. CBC News uncovers Canada's aggressive push to extradite an Ottawa man.
Did the Canadian Department of Justice lawyer lie to the court?
The transcripts speak for themselves.
I don't want any penny from the taxpayers in Canada.
Hassan Diab was remarkably composed when he returned to Canada in January, given that he'd spent more than 3 years in prison for no good reason. France called him a terrorist, and Canada approved his extradition based on flimsy evidence. Now CBC News has learned a Canadian government lawyer went to great lengths to bolster France's crumbling case and seal Diab's fate. We broke that story today, and it has already sparked reaction.
I have read the reports of the involvement of government officials in his extradition. This happened under the previous Harper government, and I think that this is indeed a matter which it is important to look into.
You're about to see why Diab's case now merits the attention of a minister. The CBC's David Cochran dug deep for the damning evidence. Here's his exclusive report now on Canada's role in the exile of an Ottawa man.
Hassan Diab is making up for lost time. 3 years and 2 months spent in a French jail in near solitary confinement. Each day taken from him by France and Canada.
Funny thing, wow. I will try. I can do it.
He's learning to be a dad to a little girl who grew up while he was in jail. Getting to know a little boy born while he was behind bars.
It was the most difficult period. And then you have one birthday after another. His first, his second. Her second, her third, her fourth, and her fifth. I missed them all. What more can you lose? If you lose these things, there's nothing left in life. Finished? Oh, Jenna has big nothing.
France has spent decades hunting Hassan Diab for a crime that still haunts that country. An explosion on this street, targeting this building. And French courts now say they got the wrong man. The crime was this 1980 bombing outside a Paris synagogue that killed 4 and injured dozens. The French case was built around contradictory eyewitness descriptions and secret intelligence obtained from unnamed sources. The only physical evidence was handwriting analysis from 2 French experts that linked Diab's writing to the bombers. This was later revealed to be deeply flawed. But Diab was still sent to France's largest prison. He spent 38 months in his cell, alone for more than 20 hours a day, without ever being charged.
How are you not consumed with anger?
If I get angry, really, what will happen? I think I will kill myself, just like that. What can you do? What else? There's nothing else. Do you commit suicide? No, because you have, these wonderful guys and the family and the kids. And do you solve anything? And the answer was constantly no.
Don Bain has been Diab's lawyer on this case for 10 years, 9 of them without billing Diab a single dime.
I would say of this case, it's clearly the most heart-wrenching in terms of what I saw it doing to Dr. Diab's family. And this is storeroom number 2 of 3.
Bain thought he knew everything about this case, but even now, there are surprises. Like this memo obtained by CBC News.
This letter or its contents was never disclosed to us, the defense, or to the court.
The memo reveals for the first time the steps Canada took to make sure Diab was extradited to France. A secret process started in 2009. Bain had successfully impeached the French handwriting evidence. Defense experts proved the comparison samples weren't even written by Diab. The French case was falling apart. So Claude Lefrançois, the senior government lawyer handling the case for Canada, wrote France, warning that significant evidence required for extradition would be lost. Lefrançois asked for 2 things to save the case: a new handwriting analysis using proper samples on short notice, and fingerprints of the bomber to compare with Diab's that Lefrançois said could be extremely persuasive and perhaps conclusive.
My first reaction is that Canada's role? Should the Department of Justice be doing this? This is France's case. Canada has no case against Dr. Diab, never did. If the French case is manifestly unreliable, seriously defective, falling apart, as you say, so be it. Canada's not the investigators for France.
But finding case-saving evidence takes time. So Lefrançois obtained an adjournment, then repeatedly told the court he had no knowledge of what France was doing. In March, 4 months after he sent that memo, Lefrançois told the judge, "I can't describe the nature of the evidence. It's somewhat useless to guess. I'm afraid we're at a loss."
Well, France is not the only one who knows. The Department of Justice lawyer knows because he directed it.
Canada knows.
Canada knows, and they know specifically what it is. It's being done at their behest.
Did the Canadian Department of Justice lawyer lie to the court?
The transcripts speak for themselves.
6 months after Lefrançois sent his memo, the key evidence arrived. In May, the tainted handwriting evidence was withdrawn. A new analysis that also suggested Diab's writing matched the Paris bombers was presented to the court. The prosecution called this evidence its smoking gun, even though the defense handwriting experts tore it apart. But under Canada's extradition laws, any evidence submitted by France has to be considered reliable, which made the prosecution's smoking gun legally bulletproof. And based on that, the judge ordered Diab's extradition to France, even though he called the French case weak and warned it was unlikely to lead to a conviction. What the court never saw was the fingerprint comparison Lefrançois asked for. The evidence he wrote could be extremely persuasive and perhaps conclusive.
And it was conclusive. Every identifiable fingerprint on that statement excluded Dr. Diab. It was not him. It was conclusive. That was never told to the court.
Conclusive, but it pointed to Diab's innocence. Under Canada's extradition law, they only have to present evidence of guilt, which also means the court never heard Diab's alibi. On the day the Paris bomb went off, he was in Beirut writing exams. University records confirm this, but in an extradition hearing, the accused is not allowed to call evidence.
You are allowed as a prosecutor to cherry pick. You can just take the exculpatory evidences and throw them away and put anything looks like inculpatory. And you, of course you win.
At all, they think that takes spots of a dress is a wall. Then we saw
it was Canada and France against one man. It took him from his family. It took more than his liberty.
I lost all incomes, some savings evaporated during the process.
He's 64, he's jobless, but he has no plans to sue.
Money for me doesn't mean a lot, especially after this long ordeal. And a day with the kids is worth more than all the money they could give me, these people. Just one day with the kids is more than all their money.
Lefrançois, the lawyer in question here, did not respond to multiple requests for an interview, but in a statement, a Department of Justice spokesperson said it is normal practice for Canadian government lawyers like Lefrançois to provide extradition requesting states such as France in this case with advice on how to strengthen their case. The spokesperson said Canada doesn't disclose confidential communications with its foreign partners to the court.
Coming up on The National, this startling video of a distracted driver in Manitoba, the motorcyclist's account of his brush with death.
If I had left right away and really put the throttle down, I would have been in the middle of that grill.
Tonight on The National, a horrifying scene captured on video in Sao Paulo, Brazil. A high-rise tower collapsing after catching fire. Squatters were living there at the time. At least one person is dead, and the search is now on for other potential victims. It's not clear what caused the fire.
Yeas pour 269, 269. Nays contre 10, 10.
I declare the motion carried. And overwhelming support in Parliament today for a motion calling on the Pope to apologize for the Church's role in the residential school system. It includes an invitation to Pope Francis to come to Canada so he can apologize in person.
Afghan journalist Sabawun Kekar was laid to rest in Kabul today, a day after he was killed in a suicide bombing. He was one of 9 journalists killed in a coordinated attack, now claimed by ISIS, that hit Afghanistan's capital. This, though, is the latest in a string of deadly, large-scale bombings and assaults that have struck the country ahead of elections planned for October. Retired Major General David Fraser was the top commander of the NATO forces in southern Afghanistan in 2006. I spoke with him earlier today for his thoughts on the attack and the future of the country.
General Fraser, can I just
maybe let's start with the events that we've seen over the past couple of days, particularly this attack on journalists. What do you make of this type of incident in particular, and whether journalists were in fact targeted, I guess?
Well, first of all, any attack like this is despicable. It's cowardly because they attacked innocent people, including in this case journalists. Whether or not the journalists were specifically targeted, I don't know. And we'll find out in the days to come. But it's a despicable attack.
You have a book coming out soon that sort of chronicles a little bit of Canada's time there, particularly around Operation Medusa. How do you feel now about that operation?
Well, first of all, I'm just immensely proud of the men and women who served, the 40,000 men and women who served, Canadians who served in Afghanistan, and all the men and women from around the world who served over there, trying to provide hope and opportunity to people who just don't have it. So, their contributions weren't in vain, and Operation Medusa was a key battle.
And those operations were successful in defeating a significant Taliban presence, which has made that area safer, and in part has also made Kandahar safer.
And look at it now. We're in 2018, and we're still talking about peace and whatnot, and it's going to take a long time. It wasn't a waste. It was very costly. Men and women gave up their lives for this thing, but we are where we are today, and we're still talking. There's over 300,000 Afghan security forces still engaged in this, and there is the genesis, the start of a peace discussion between the Taliban and the government of Afghanistan. We've got to support the diplomatic efforts to find a peace settlement to this conflict.
Do you see peace in the future of that country?
I'm not sure if I actually see peace. I see a peace process, and the process has to be supported and allowed to keep on going, and encouraging all the parties to come around the table so they can air their grievances and actually do it through discussion and dialogue, vice using violence.
Okay. General, thank you.
Hey, thank you.
Canada's combat mission in Afghanistan ended in 2011, and Canadian soldiers withdrew from the country entirely in 2014. Right now, though, there are roughly 16,000 foreign troops there, mostly from the United States, to train and assist the Afghan forces.
Well, much of Washington is playing detective tonight, puzzling out who leaked special counsel questions to the New York Times. There are just under 50 in all, questions that Robert Mueller would like to ask U.S. President Donald Trump as part of the Russia probe. The questions themselves are methodical and cover a lot of ground. But as Paul Hunter tells us, that the public has seen them at all raises perhaps the biggest question mark.
Thank you all. Among the questions shouted at Donald Trump today, what does he think about those leaked questions?
Thank you.
He didn't answer. Said to be special counsel Robert Mueller's wish list, roughly his top 50 questions for Donald Trump leaked to the New York Times. Each is intriguing. Everything from Trump's thoughts on James Comey to Michael Flynn to Jeff Sessions. And of course, Russia. But the list itself raises two more questions. Who leaked it and why? Goes one theory, it's from the president's own inner circle, some of whom might worry Trump's unpredictable nature could spell disaster at a sit-down with Mueller. So the idea is that leaking the list to the Times puts the questions out there. The president then sees how they play, and then maybe Trump simply decides to steer clear of Mueller, if that's possible.
I am told by my sources tonight that the New York Times is full of crap.
On Fox News, known go-to news source for Trump, Sean Hannity dismissed the questions altogether.
This New York Times thing, put it in your fireplace and burn it.
The list is said to have been given to Trump's legal team in March. Soon after that, his lead lawyer quit, replaced by Rudy Giuliani, who's said to now question Mueller's objectivity. Thus, another theory. Giuliani leaked it to suggest Mueller's going too far. Trump's view in the past, when asked would he testify?
I would like to.
But today he tweeted, the leak is disgraceful and part of a witch hunt. And yet, for the record, Trump is still willing to sit down with Mueller and take those questions, at least for now. Paul Hunter, CBC News, Washington.
Well, in order, that was Les Paul, Jimmy Page, and Lenny Kravitz, guitar legends who swore by the sound of a legendary guitar, Gibson. Today, after years in debt, the guitar maker filed for bankruptcy protection, but don't expect the 124-year-old brand to disappear. We asked Peter Kesper of Capsule Music in Toronto to explain what makes the Gibson so unique.
All right, this is the classic Les Paul, Gibson Les Paul. The design hasn't changed. It feels great, sounds great, and this is what Gibson should be making right now. They're innovators in sound and tone. The best recordings have been made with Gibson guitars, whether it be Les Pauls or Firebirds or SGs. They were a handcrafted guitar that could actually be plugged in and played loud. So I think they created something that musicians could really express how they wanted to feel through a guitar. This is another classic Gibson model. This is an SG. I know there's all different styles of music and the EDM and the techno and everything else that's being produced, not as organically as perhaps a guitar, but I think that's an addition to our music world. I don't think it's stopping people from playing guitar. We see lots of young guys coming in here, and all the bands that are out now, there's lots of young guitar players. This one is a 1959 335. I think Gibson will stick around. Hopefully they'll get an owner or somebody in who can really look at the company and decide what direction it should go. Pay off some debts, get back to making great instruments. They're legendary for making amazing guitars.
Wheeler again, Shifley shoots, great save, another shot, score!
Oh, the atmosphere electric inside Winnipeg's Bell MTS Place tonight. The Jets right now up against the Nashville Predators 6-4. The game actually just ending here. Game 3 in the second round of the playoffs, and a win for the Jets puts them ahead in the series. It's also the Jets' first home game of this series, and making it even this far, by the way, it's the closest they've gotten to the Stanley Cup. And you can bet Winnipeg was not about to let that happen without a celebration. So tens of thousands of fans decked out in white flooded the streets. They are the whiteout. And we asked Karen Pauls to show us why they've become such a big part of home ice advantage.
Game 3 isn't do or die, but don't tell these fans. Go, Jets, go! The city closed down blocks around the arena. 10 to 15,000 people were expected for the biggest yet whiteout street party. Inside the arena, more than 15,000 fans. Their first chance to see the two best teams in the NHL battling it out in the second round.
We're going to be calling out to our fans to really put the pressure on, because we have that ability here. Our fan base is awesome, and our noise can carry some serious momentum.
For the team and its fans, expectations are high.
I think what you're seeing is the culmination of years of hard work, years of patience, just all coming together at the same time. Winnipeg flies under the radar. It's the same as when you see all those people out in the street celebrating this playoff run. People are surprised by that, but no one in Winnipeg is.
And his face lost all expression.
On the streets and on the airwaves, loud and proud civic pride.
You got to know Blake Wheeler.
Local band Doc Walker has recorded a version of Kenny Rogers' The Gambler. Manitobans collaborated on the lyrics.
'Cause it's guaranteed that Big Buff has his eye on you.
All over the city, it's game on. Karen Pauls, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Portage and Maine is ready, and you're invited to the party so we can sing.
Catchy song. It is not just the team reaping the benefits of the comeback here. This playoff run and the return of the Jets to Winnipeg in 2011 have also created economic winners in the city.
It's really hitting a pinnacle right now for a lot of Winnipeggers and others who are recognizing that downtown Winnipeg has vibrancy, has a lot going, and boy, can bring a street party like no other.
And to that point, the team has generated almost $3 billion in redevelopment in the downtown core, about $1 billion of that around the hockey arena.
Well, we have some stunning video to show you now, released by the Mounties in Manitoba. The dash cam video is meant to draw attention to the dangers of distracted driving. A close call that took place last week, and as you watch it, keep in mind, the man on the motorcycle is incredibly okay. Take a look. Yep, that's a motorcycle colliding head-on with a semi at an intersection just outside Winnipeg. Rob Selby, the man on the bike, somehow only suffering minor injuries, and today he shared his story with us. It's our moment of the day.
There's not a whole lot that passed through my mind at the moment other than ouch. I originally thought my bike had been pulled under the semi, but when I watched the actual video, I see that the bike gets tossed away. It's actually just myself who starts to go in the direction of the semi. So luckily I stopped and the semi stopped. Injury-wise, again, I'm lucky. All it is bruises and hopefully that there's nothing permanent. I don't want to target a semi driver or this one driver. I think what I would like to do is see harsher rules, not just a $400 fine or a $1,000 fine on distracted driving in situations like this. My kids may have not had a father.
So if I understand that video right, it looks like the motorcycle got the green light, headed into the intersection. The semi goes through what must have been a red light, and he mentioned the penalties. $400 fine and a ticket is what that driver got.
Yeah, and they did tweet that out. That was the RCMP that tweeted it out earlier this morning. Someone in our newsroom flagged it to me because they're trying to use it, obviously, now as sort of a, hey, maybe don't get on your phone or whatever you were doing when you were driving there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no kidding. And I just checked. I mean, the video itself has tens of thousands of views. So hopefully at least a handful of people are getting that message. But Ian, you talk about that fine, the $400 fine for distracted driving. According to police, witnesses told them that they saw the driver of the truck on his cell phone as he was driving through that intersection. So that's something, of course, that they took into account. But my gosh, what a story.
Lucky.
Glad to see he came out okay. Yeah, no kidding. That's the National for this Tuesday, May 1st. Good night.
Good night.
Night.